All right, it's Wednesday, last video lesson of the week, where we are looking closely at the different techniques and strategies that this author of the story, The Elevator, uses in his story so that we too, when we become authors at the end of the week and we finish writing the story for him, we make sure that we're using similar techniques so that it flows. All right, let's just get started. So today we're focusing on using and punctuating dialogue. And so what I mean by that is that authors in every story use dialogue in their stories to show how characters speak and interact with one another in a given situation. So when we're reading a book and we see quotation marks and characters are saying certain things to each other, that's dialogue. And so obviously this author has used dialogue in his story. And so what we're going to be looking at today is how to use dialogue appropriately, but then also how to punctuate it, meaning how to write dialogue when we become a writer and we go to write the ending of this story. So we're going to watch this short video. This video is going to talk about how to punctuate dialogue. But before we do that, I want to remind you that the purpose of dialogue in a story is to show us a character's personality. So based on what the author has a character say, we get to see their personality a little bit. So remember, in this story, we could tell a lot about Martin's dad based on the things that he was saying and how he said it. And so we're looking a lot at like tone and different word choice of what these characters are saying because we want it to sound real. If we don't put dialogue in a story, then we're assuming that characters never talk, and that's weird. But when we have characters talk, we need to make sure that the purpose of the talking is authentic. The talking that they do sounds like something they would say and how they would say it. And so we need to be really clear with our dialogue and make sure we're staying consistent with that character's personality, or it's going to seem really silly. And so, again, we're going to look in this video. It's going to show us how to add dialogue to our short story that we're writing at the end of the week, where we're finishing this author's story. We're writing the ending. So here we go.
Welcome to Grammar for Kids, Chapter 4, Punctuating Dialogue, Part 1. What is a dialogue? A dialogue is a conversation between two characters. A dialogue can tell a story, explain a character's reaction, or help the reader understand what the main character is thinking. A dialogue contains what the character said and the dialogue tag. The sentence that the character says begins and ends with quotation marks. In the sentence below, "Do you like cake?" Tina asked. "Do you like cake" is the sentence that Tina says, and Tina asked is the dialogue tag. In a dialogue, quotation marks belong before the first word and after the final word that the character says. When you think of quotation marks, think of a door that opens and closes. The opening quotation mark opens the dialogue and begins the spoken sentence. In the sentence below, "The city looks beautiful at night," said Jean. The opening quotation mark goes before the word "the," since "the" is the first word of the spoken sentence. The closing quotation mark closes the sentence and lets the reader know that the spoken sentence is complete. In the sentence below, "The city looks beautiful at night," said Jean. The closing quotation mark goes after night, the final word that Jean says. Now it's your turn. Pause the video and add quotation marks before and after the following character dialogue sentences.
Okay, so we're going to stop there for a second. As you can see, they want us to practice, so I'm just going to kind of show you where these would go. So in our first example, "I'm allergic to peanuts," Rachel said. Our quotation marks are going to go at before "I'm" and after "peanuts." But we need to make sure that our quotation marks goes after the comma, so after our punctuation. So our first ones would go here, and our second ones would go here. okay, because this is the dialogue and this is the dialogue tag, kind of telling us who said it. Same thing here. I love homework, yelled Jeff. It's going to start here because the first thing he says is I, and it's going to go after our exclamation point because that's what he's yelling. And then lastly, do I have to eat soup again? Asked Robert. Our quotation marks are going to go here and after the question mark. And so, guys, a common mistake that kids make when writing is they forget that these punctuations, this comma, this exclamation point, and this question mark need to go inside the quotation marks. So if you choose to add dialogue, which you're going to be required to, but when you choose to add dialogue to your to the ending of our story that we're writing this week, we need to make sure that we're writing these quotes correctly. So we're using our punctuation inside the quotation mark, the quotation marks appropriately.
Karen, the D in don't is capitalized because don't is the first word that Karen says. Now it's your turn. Pause the video and capitalize the first letter of each character dialogue.
Okay, so self-explanatory. Guys, when you have a dialogue that you're adding to a story, you'll notice that all authors make sure that the first word inside the quotation marks needs to be capitalized. So in this first example, we would need to capitalize the P in please because it's the first word inside the quotation marks. Here, we would need to capitalize the W because it's the first word in quotation marks. And same thing here with the don't in don't worry. Okay, so when we go to do our own writing, we need to remember that good writers using the correct techniques capitalize the first word inside their dialogue, their quotation marks.
Here are the correct responses. The dialogue tag tells the reader who is speaking and how they are speaking. In the sentence below, I really like playing fetch, barked Rover. The dialogue tag is barked Rover. Barked is how Rover spoke, and Rover is the who, or in this case, what spoke. The comma separates the spoken words from the dialogue tag. In the sentence below, I had a great time at the party, said Jessica. The comma separates the spoken words from the dialogue tag. The position of the comma depends on where the dialogue tag is in the sentence. Think of the comma as a separator. If the dialogue tag comes after the spoken words, the comma belongs right before the closing quotation mark. If the dialogue tag comes before the spoken words, the comma belongs after the dialogue tag to separate the spoken words from the dialogue tag. Now it's your turn. Pause the video and place the commas in their proper positions. Remember, the comma either goes before the dialogue tag, inside the closing quotation mark, or after the dialogue tag.
Okay, so in this first example, we could see that the dialogue tag is at the end of our sentence here. So that being said, our comma would go right here after the word lost inside the quotation marks. Okay, so anytime we have our dialogue tag at the end, we need to make sure that our comma is inside the quotation marks. And our comma just takes the place of a period. So if we're not putting a question mark or a quotation mark, and we would usually just put a period, we're going to put a comma instead because the period is right here. All right, Sarah whispered, "Don't go too far at night." The dialogue tag is in the front. And so our comma is going to go right here after the word whispered. And then our last one, go clean your room and wash the dishes. This is the dialogue tag at the end. So our comma is going to go here after the word dishes. Okay, so as you can see, there are a couple of specific rules that we want to use when we put dialogue in the ending of our story later this week. So I'm going to show you a quick example from our text here, where there's some dialogue happening between characters. This is where Martin is talking to his dad about the lady on the elevator. So I'm going to show you some things that I notice. This time I'm going to, if I get to, I'm going to use blue. All right, so we'll stop here, we'll start at the top. When the elevator stopped on his floor, she hardly moved out of his way. He had to squeeze past her, rubbing against her horrible, scratchy coat. He was afraid the door would close before he could get out. She turned and watched him as the door slammed shut. Now she knows I live on 17, he thought. Well, there's our first dialogue right here. Here's the dialogue tag, and here's what he is saying. Or I guess what he's thinking, but he must have said it out loud. And so notice we have our quotation marks. We have our comma inside. And then we made sure to have a capital letter at the beginning. All right, here we go. Have you ever noticed a strange lady in the elevator? He asked his father that evening. Can't say I have, he replied, not looking away from the television. Martin knew he was probably making a mistake, but he had to tell somebody about this woman. She was in the elevator with me twice today. She kept staring at me. He never stopped looking at me, or she never stopped looking at me for a minute. What are you so worried about now? His father said, turning impatiently away from the television. What am I going to do with you, Martin? Honestly, now you're afraid of some poor old lady. I'm not afraid. You're afraid. Oh, I'm not afraid. You're afraid, said his father. When are you going to grow up and act like a man? Are you going to be timid all your life? So I want to kind of notice a couple of things of what's going on here. So I'm continuing to notice that my author has capitalized the beginning of everything that's being said. I'm noticing that they've used correct punctuation. Notice the punctuation is inside the quotation marks. It's not on the outside. But I'm also noticing this. I'm noticing that the author is putting words like replied. And down here, where's that? And then down here, we're getting the word said. But I'm noticing the author is getting a little bit specific about how things are being said. I'm also noticing that the author is telling me what's happening while they're talking. So the author's not just having the characters talk and saying, have you noticed a strange lady on the elevator? Can't say I have. What are you so worried about? You're afraid. I'm not afraid. Without telling us what they're doing. They need to tell us what's happening while the characters are having dialogue and having conversation in order to make this sound like a realistic conversation. And so we as the writer, when we go to end this story, we need to make sure that when we have dialogue, we're not only using the correct punctuation like this author has, but we're also letting the reader know what's happening while this conversation is taking place, not looking away from the television, which is perfect for his dad because we know his dad doesn't really acknowledge him that much. Here, turning impatiently away from the television. They're telling us exactly what's happening to create that picture of kind of what dad's interaction with Martin is like in this conversation. And so when we write at the end of the week, we want to make sure to add dialogue to our ending, make sure we're punctuating it correctly using quotation marks, correct punctuation inside, and dialogue tags. Also, letting the reader know what characters are doing when they're talking to make it seem realistic. And we also want the characters to sound like themselves. So we don't want to make Dad all of a sudden sound nice or make Martin all of a sudden sound brave if that's not what these characters are like in their conversations. All right. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, come on. There we go. So again, I want to remind you that we noticed that the author had the characters say specific things based on their personalities. We noticed that the authors are using specific words instead of said, like the word replied. And there is a link in here of other words you can use in your short story other than said to be a little more specific. I'm noticing that the author made the dialogue seem real by telling us what the characters were doing during the conversation. And then I'm noticing that the author used correct punctuation throughout. And so the last thing we need to remember, you guys, is that when we write the end of the story this week, we want to make the dialogue seem real, just like the author did. We want to make the characters and their conversations as realistic as possible. And we do that by doing all of these things that we just talked about that the author did already in the story. So, as a reminder, this week, tomorrow being Thursday, and Friday, those are writing days. So, you're going to use those days to get started on your writing. And you're going to be writing the ending of this story. So, you're just going to pick up right where we left off, or right where the author left off, and you're going to keep the story going. And there will be directions for that on Google Classroom. But what I'm going to be grading on is, did you use imagery in your story? Because we learned that on Monday. Did you use vivid language like we learned on Monday? Did you use or did you keep the character's personality in mind as you continued the story like we learned on Tuesday? And are you using dialogue and using it correctly like we're learning today? And so now that we're done with this today, please make sure to go to your week lesson video check-in. You're marking that you did not attend the Google Meet, which is why I'm assuming you're watching this video. And make sure to write your 4-sentence summary. And so due tonight by midnight are your 3 4-sentence summaries showing that you've watched the video lesson for all 3 days this week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. All right, guys, have a great rest of the week. Bye.